I'm Scott Miller, and on today's special episode, I want to talk about the difference between what an immigrant is and what an expat is. Now, the background to this is just the other day, I posted a video explaining why you can't work teaching English inside Nicaragua as an expat. And when I posted this on Reddit, I got some pushback from some angry people talking about how I didn't know what expats were. I shouldn't use the term expat because immigrants are immigrants and so forth. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit today because this is a nuance of the English language. Immigrants and expats are not actually the same thing. And in some places, they may overlap heavily. And in other places, like here in Nicaragua, they are discrete categories and basically never overlap. They can, but basically never. Now we're going to start with some dictionary definitions. I will link to them below. I will try to show them here on the video while we're doing this. But when you look in the American Heritage Dictionary, basically it comes down to this. An immigrant is a person who has settled permanently in a new country, as in they are not in the country of their birth or nationality. They are permanently settled in a new country. An expat is a person who is residing away from their home country. These may sound like two different ways to say the same thing, but they are very clearly not. Obviously, there is going to be an awful lot of overlap. If you are an immigrant in a new country, chances are you are also an expatriate. Expat simply being a short form of expatriate. Because to be an immigrant, you must also be an expat. But it is relatively easy to be an expat without being an immigrant. And there are some key things that tend to be different. And I'm going to speak a little bit about the US and Nicaragua because many of the people who are posting and reading this are specifically looking at those countries. But these things generally apply almost everywhere. And you can pretty much figure out how this will apply in your local context. In the United States, and one of the reasons I want to preface, I understand that a lot of people get upset about this because it is common to use the term immigrant, especially in the United States, with a negative connotation. Whether you're a legal immigrant or an illegal immigrant, calling someone an immigrant, while not expressly derogatory, is often meant that way, or at least often sounds that way. And we often use the term expat to refer to wealthy people from the United States who have moved somewhere else. And so we tend to call immigrants who come to the U.S. looking for opportunity immigrants, and immigrants who have gone to other countries from the United States expats. And that is true. And I have argued previously that we would be well served if we started referring to people who move to the United States, legal or not, as expats, to get across the point that just being an immigrant is not a bad thing on its own. In fact, it can be a great thing. There's no negative or positive inherent in either of these terms. There is a certain amount of association of expat with affluence, and that's for reasons you'll understand as we get through the video. Let's start with immigrants. When you're an immigrant, it requires to meet the definition of an immigrant that you have settled permanently or attempted to settle permanently, nothing is truly permanent, in a new country. This implies, it does not guarantee, but it essentially implies the right to work. You are a part of the workforce of that new country. Even if you're an illegal immigrant, chances are you're going to be working in that new country. And if you're a legal immigrant, we normally use the term legal immigrant to mean having the right to work and reside permanently in a country. Are there exceptions to this? Yes, there are special circumstances where you are allowed to be a permanent resident of a new country without the right to work, but you are permanent and protected. Very rare, but it does exist. But we assume most of the time that immigrant implies the right to work and the joining of the economy because you are a permanent member of the new society. Only the most absolutely affluent could ever be a true immigrant without the right to work. That would be the extreme 0.1% that you have guaranteed that for the rest of your life you will never need income again, and you are willing to live purely off of your savings or investments from your former life. So if you think about that, immigrant actually implies, in that situation, extreme affluence. Expats are different. Expat only means that you have left your home country. It implies in no way that you have found permanent settlement somewhere else. And we generally refer to people as expats when they are not permanently settled somewhere. If they become permanently settled, we tend to refer to them as immigrants. This happens very infrequently. The two groups, the ones that we refer to in this way, don't generally convert. And I'm going to talk about Nicaragua a bit because Nicaragua has both, but primarily expats. The United States has both, but primarily immigrants. In the United States, if you are living there from abroad, chances are you have come there to permanently settle and are working towards permanent settlement in the United States. It may be very difficult to get. You may get denied We're not talking about the problems with the process in the United States. That typically is why someone is there. Here in Nicaragua, we have the opposite. The majority of people who are here from outside of the country are not here for the purpose of permanent settlement. They are here as a permanent, having left their former country, whether the United States, Canada, England, or whatever. They are not necessarily here in Nicaragua permanently for a very good reason. Nicaragua does not offer immigration to most people coming from most of the English-speaking world. People coming from the United States, Canada, England, and so forth essentially have no path to immigration in Nicaragua. You have only long-term expatting, in which you are permanently absent from your home country, but you are temporarily in Nicaragua. That temporary may be very long, but is never granted in total for more than 6 months at a time. For most people, it is at most 3 months at a time. And while technically you can get a 5-year visa, that 5-year visa still has a 6-month check-in, and only a very small number of expats are able to get the 5-year visa. Some get the 1-year visa. A very few get marriage visas, which are permanent until divorce, which you can argue whether that counts for immigration or not. But it is, if you get that visa and get divorced, you are instantly removed from the visa process. You have no residency instantly, so you are not a full immigrant in the way that people mean it. So these terms are actually really important. And when I made the video, the question was, can an expat teach English in Nicaragua? The question is not, can an immigrant teach English in Nicaragua? Because an immigrant in Nicaragua certainly can teach English. That's how important the differentiation is. In Nicaragua, if you are an immigrant, you have the right to work. In Nicaragua, if you are an expat, by and large, you do not have the right to work. An immigrant is part of the Nicaraguan economy and will be for the rest of their lives. An expat may be a part of the Nicaraguan economy for a very long time or may not be, but they are inherently transient, whether it is because they have to leave the country every 6 months just for a couple days, or because they are simply on a visa that does not allow permanency and always at the whims of migración. Whatever the reason, expatting in most of the world is different from immigration. And that is a really important differentiation in many cases. Yes, there are certainly cases where we use expat to mean those who are more affluent or those who are coming from the first world, and we shouldn't use it in that way. And we often use immigrant in negative ways that we should not, because those terms do not mean those things in any way whatsoever. But they are technical terms. They have very strict English language definitions. They overlap heavily, but they are not the same term. And that is important. And when I made the video, I was being very conscientious to use the correct word, because had I used the word immigrant, my statements would be wrong. And the person who said an immigrant is an immigrant and that I don't know what these terms mean needs to look at a dictionary, because these are discrete terms with two different groups of people, and they change the answer to the question. The entire video was based around expats, not immigrants. So that's important. And when people talk about expats in the general sense, we are generally talking about nomadic people. They may be heavily settled. You may go to Argentina for 10 years, Spain for 10 years. A lot of people who are watching this channel talk about coming to Nicaragua, but they are not talking about immigrating to Nicaragua. They are simply talking about expatting, possibly long term. Some people are like, I would like to come down for 3 to 5 years. Some people are like, I'd like to come down for 20 years. Those are realistic things. But almost always, especially in a country like Nicaragua, where permanent immigration is not on the roadmap. I'm not saying that there's absolutely no path to it. There is essentially no path to it. In all of our talks about residency and expatting here in Nicaragua, at no point has anybody in the government, in our lawyer's office, in any online discussions ever brought up the concept of, would you like to immigrate? Is that even on the table? No, because it's so far-fetched. It is so unlikely that you could qualify. And for the most part, you don't want to qualify. Being an expat here is perfect. There's very little reason to desire immigration unless you are a refugee fleeing another country. If the United States gets much scarier than it is, seeking asylum in Nicaragua and seeking to immigrate, yes, it's an absolute possibility. But that's the kind of thing that's going to have to happen. You're going to want to be at the status where you are literally requesting refugee status as an asylum seeker in order to talk about immigration. Otherwise, you're purely looking at expatting, whether for a little time or a long time. And most people who do it here or anywhere in this part of the world are typically looking at, yes, semi-permanent, long-term investments in their lives here, they're very rarely looking at making a really strong commitment to never having the option or the realistic option to leave. When you immigrate to a place, you put in a lot of work becoming a permanent immigrant, and that makes it very difficult to leave and very impractical to leave. Expats, we assume when we use that term, when it's an expat who's not an immigrant, we generally assume that they have the ability to pack up and go in a matter of days, if not in a matter of hours. Not that they would, but they can. And so even the people who have been here for a very long time typically are expats and always have that option of moving on somewhere else. And Nicaragua has the option of not allowing you to stay. If you're an immigrant, they are kind of on the hook to keep you because they allowed you to immigrate, assuming that you went through the process to do so. Of all the people we know who live here who come from abroad, all of them, I do not know of a single one who has immigrated or attempted to immigrate. They are true expats in every sense of the word. And every single person who has talked to me about coming here is talking about doing so as an expat, but not as an immigrant. Thank you for watching my video. I hope this helps clear up that in no way are these terms synonymous. You should not use them as synonymous. You should never suggest that they are synonymous. And you should definitely not attack people on Reddit over nuances of a language that the person who is attacking us over clearly was not their first language. I understand that this is a nuance of the English language. This is not something that even most English speakers could articulate exactly why they're different, but we all know that they're different. We just aren't necessarily sure why, but there are clear dictionary definitions when you actually look at them that make it obvious why one is about the place that you are leaving and the other is about the place you are going, and they address different aspects of mobility in slightly different ways. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I will see all of you tomorrow.